You know, when a person gets a breast cancer diagnosis, the number one goal, the most urgent thing in the world, is to get that cancer out. It's a goal that the patient and the surgeon share completely. But what sounds like a really simple objective is actually one of the most complicated and emotionally intense parts of cancer treatment. And it all boils down to something you can't even see: what's happening at the microscopic edge of the surgery.
So, here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to dive right into that microscopic battlefield. We'll start with the main objective, then we'll break down what surgical margins actually are. From there, we'll get into the huge debate about how much tissue is enough, uncover a really surprising link to long-term risk, and then we'll finish up by looking at what the path forward is for patients today.
All right, Section 1, the goal. It's simple, right? The mission is just crystal clear. Get the tumor out. All of it. Every single other part of a person's treatment plan really hinges on getting this first critical step right. Okay, so for most people with early-stage cancer, the journey starts with one of two surgical choices. There's a mastectomy, which is the removal of the entire breast, or there's the much more common option these days, a lumpectomy. You might also hear it called breast-conserving surgery. And that's where the surgeon just takes out the tumor itself, along with a little bit of the healthy tissue surrounding it. But get this is the part that's just wild. Worldwide, up to 30%, that's nearly 1 in 3 women who have a lumpectomy, have to go back for a second operation, a second surgery. Just think about all the physical and emotional stress that comes with that. So the big question is, why? Why on earth is this happening so often? To answer that why, we need to zoom in. I mean, way in. So for Section 2, let's talk about surgical margins. Because this, right here, this is where the entire challenge is. So what is a surgical margin? Well, picture the piece of tissue the surgeon removed. A pathologist takes it and literally paints the outer edge with ink. It's like drawing a boundary line. Then they slice it up and look at it under a microscope. Now, if any cancer cells are right up against that ink, boom, that's a positive margin. If the cells are super close but not quite touching, we call that a close margin. And the goal, the home run, is a negative or clear margin, where there's a nice, clean buffer of healthy tissue between the tumor and that ink line. Okay, so the goal is a clear negative margin. Sounds straightforward enough, doesn't it? So what makes it so incredibly difficult to nail on the first try? Well, the answer often points to one specific type of non-invasive cancer.
And that brings us to something called ductal carcinoma in situ, or DCIS. Here's the core problem. DCIS doesn't grow in a neat little ball. It spreads out inside the milk ducts in these super intricate branching patterns. Seriously, think about the roots of a tree. A surgeon can't see these microscopic little tendrils with their naked eye, which makes it incredibly hard to know if they've truly gotten every last bit.
And all of that uncertainty leads us straight into the biggest debate in the entire field. Even when a margin isn't technically positive, there's this huge controversy over what close really means and whether it's actually safe enough. You've basically got two camps. In one corner is the no ink on tumor guideline. For invasive cancer, this camp says, look, as long as the cancer isn't literally touching the ink, we're good. Any space at all is enough. But in the other corner, you have the wider is better philosophy. And this is especially true when that tricky DCIS is in the mix. These guys are saying, whoa, not so fast. We need a real safety buffer here, at least 2 millimeters of clean tissue. And this disagreement, it has massive implications. And you can see the real-world impact right here. It's huge. A 2022 Finnish study looked at thousands of patients with DCIS. And listen to this. If the margin was 1 millimeter or less, a staggering 70% of those patients needed a second surgery. 70%. When the margin was just a little wider, between 1 and 2 millimeters, that number dropped to 43%. The point is, millimeters. These tiny, tiny distances matter. A lot. For the longest time, this whole margin debate was about preventing the cancer from coming back in the same breast, what's known as a local recurrence. But now, in Section 4, this is where the story takes a really critical and, frankly, surprising turn. The question that changed everything was this. Could the status of that tiny little edge of tissue actually predict if the cancer would spread to other parts of the body? You know, distant places, like the bones or the lungs or the liver. Could a close shave in the breast affect your whole body? And the answer from a massive 2022 meta-analysis by a team led by Bundred was a resounding and kind of scary yes. They pulled data from 68 different studies, looking at over 112,000 women, and what they found completely shifted the conversation. The findings were just stark. The risk of the cancer spreading to distant parts of the body was over 25% for patients with a tumor on ink positive margin. But for patients with a clean negative margin, that risk plummeted to just over 7%. This wasn't just about cancer coming back in the breast anymore. This was about survival. To put an even finer point on it, the study calculated what's called a hazard ratio. And what it showed was that having a positive margin more than doubled the risk of distant recurrence. That is a huge deal. It suggests that leaving even a microscopic trace of cancer behind might be like leaving a door unlocked for it to get into the bloodstream and travel. But just when you think you've got it figured out, that the answer is just wider is always better, the science throws in another major curveball. Because the treatment that happens after surgery, specifically radiation, can completely change the rules of the game. A large study from Vanzi's team made this incredibly clear. For patients with DCIS who did not get radiation, the margin width was hugely important. The wider the margin, the lower the risk of it coming back. But for the patients who did get radiation, the link between how wide the margin was and whether the cancer came back, it just vanished. It's like the radiation therapy acts as a cleanup crew, zapping any microscopic disease that might have been left near the... So, where does all this leave us? Well, that brings us to Section 5, the path forward. And it really seems to be a two-pronged approach. 1, improving the technology we use in the operating room, and 2, improving the communication that happens outside of it. On the technology side, innovation is absolutely booming. Instead of the old-school uncomfortable wires used to mark a tumor, surgeons now have these amazing tiny magnetic seeds, like MagSeed, that let them target a tumor with pinpoint precision. And what's coming next is straight out of sci-fi. Researchers are testing fluorescent dyes that could make cancer cells literally glow during surgery, giving surgeons a real-time map of exactly what to cut. But look, technology is only half the battle. The human element is just as critical. Study after study shows that the quality of the conversation between a doctor and a patient directly impacts how satisfied that patient is. It turns out that having a support person in the room, feeling like you're truly being heard, and even having a doctor who understands that different personalities need to hear things differently, all of it plays a huge role in getting through these tough decisions. And ultimately, that patient experience is just so important. This quote from a big survey says it all. It found that patient satisfaction isn't just about the outcome of the surgery. It's about the whole process, feeling educated, feeling comfortable, and feeling like you are an engaged, active partner with your surgeon in making these calls. And this is that journey. It's a timeline filled with trade-offs. You're constantly weighing the risk of the cancer coming back against the side effects of more treatment. Do I push for a wider margin, or am I okay with a closer one if it means I get radiation? There are no easy one-size-fits-all answers, which is exactly why that partnership between a patient and their doctor is essential. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? We've seen that the right margin depends on the type of cancer, on whether you get radiation, on the risk of it spreading. So as our science gets sharper and our tools get more precise, the real challenge ahead is figuring out how to perfect the art of tailoring these incredibly complex choices, not just to the biology of a tumor, but to the life, the values, and the goals of the person it's affecting.